Hello, my name is Zahid Ilkal. I'm part of the product management team at CommVault, and in this section over here we are going to cover how CommVault takes advantage of some of the hybrid cloud technologies that are available there to expand the capabilities from just basic data protection to taking advantage of your hybrid clouds. Alright, this slide here kind of gives us the overarching vision of where we think the virtual machine lifecycle is basically. So, and we kind of know this in some forms: configuration, provision, manage, operate, data protection, recovery, and so on and so forth. We talked about this whole section over here where it's agentless data protection, IntelliSnap, multiple SLAs, integrated deduplication, so on and so forth, support for file servers, applications, various OS types, and so on and so forth. The one thing that I really want to talk about is the whole DR and recovery option over there. Not just DR and recovery using infrastructure in your environment, but how do I go about taking advantage of things that are outside in a public cloud framework to be able to take advantage of DR there. So really it comes in two forms. One is your production workload is a physical server, or I haven't yet graduated to the point where I use agentless backups to back up my VMs. So I'm going and backing up my VMs as regular production servers. There are still a lot of customers, believe it or not, that do that. But effectively, from a data protection perspective, they are being backed up as physical servers, which is I have my agent in there and I'm doing my traditional, go back in, scan the system and pull my backup set out there. In version 9, so about 3 years ago, we introduced this capability of what we call virtualize me, which is effectively the idea, the notion there is, again, go back to the thing, when I collect my backup data for those physical servers, I not only collect files, I collect everything I need to know about that server, including its system state, including its hardware configuration, including its network configuration, and so on and so forth, and I capture that and I retain that. So as a result, when you need to do a DR, I can go back in, and if I have access to a virtual machine environment based on VMware today, I can go in, and if that physical server goes down, I can very quickly execute what we call a virtualize me operation, which is basically use my credentials to log into the virtual infrastructure, provision a new virtual machine automatically that mirrors the configuration of the physical server. So if the original machine has 2 hard drives, I'm going to 2 volumes, I'm going to create 2 volumes. If it has whatever, 2 network interfaces, I'll create 2 network interfaces on the server over here, CPU, RAM, and so on and so forth. Provision a virtual machine inside the infrastructure there, and then kick off a bare metal restore into that virtual machine. Right? So I don't have to have like for like, so 2 things. I don't have to have a like for like infrastructure up and running for a DR context over there. I can basically say, yep, I don't have to spin up a virtual machine. I already have a virtual infrastructure here. Anytime it goes down, I can always bring it back up. Secondly, I don't have to limit myself to my private cloud over here. I can actually, there's a lot of VMware based public clouds that already have this capability that I already have access to. So I can essentially do the same technique using a VMware based hybrid cloud out in the cloud as well. As long as I have a virtual network that maps into my data center here, which you have to do anyways for most things, I can do the same thing and shift my workloads over here. So it's not just a DR thing though, it's DR happens once, but DR tests happens very regularly. So this was one of those things where do I really need to, because I'm mandated to do DR tests, do I really need to have infrastructure stood up over here? Why can't I just take advantage of all the resources available to me, drive it out there, pay for it only when I actually run the DR test? Don't have to pay for it just to have the infrastructure running. I just power it up, consume it, do my validation, power it down, and my bill is limited to only that activity over there. Right? And all of that is driven seamlessly. You can automate it, basically going back to the orchestration engine around workflow. I can define a workflow orchestration engine that will do it not just for one server, but do it for like a group of servers that you've defined. Go back and run a few set of scripts and validation processes inside there. Once it's done, come back with a nice summary of here are all the VMs that we tried this on, this worked, this didn't work, this worked, this didn't work, here you go.
Can we do a sort of cost minimization on the storage as well? So do the backup into the cloud onto low cost storage, and then at the recovery time or test time have it promoted to more expensive, higher performance? So is that data at rest is what's going to cost you the most in this whole solution?
Well, you don't have to keep the data at rest too. First of all, you can always go back in there once my DR test is done.
We're just using it as the compute.
Right, it's just a compute thing, right? So as soon as it's done, I can delete it off over there.
It's not the persistent storage.
Correct, it's not persistent. But to your point, yes, I don't have to have like for like. So from a DR test perspective, what I can do is I may have eager 0 or a thick provision disk here, but when I do a virtualize me, I can provision servers with thin provision only. So I don't unnecessarily consume a lot of space on the back end. In fact, I think that's a default. When we provision a VM, we provision it as thin provision.
I was thinking if this goes then to something like an Amazon platform behind it, then you want to have the backup data goes to something like Glacier when you, for compliance kind of functions.
Good point. So if the data is already sitting in the cloud, so I've done my backups, I've dash copied it off to storage target over here. The nice thing about Amazon is as long as you're co-load, you're not paying for access to the S3 data. Sure. So yes, you pay for a repository, but I can always bring it back anytime. I can do those DR tests as many times as I want. And yeah, so at that point, yes, it's still sitting on S3. Sure. I need to bring it to some sort of production level storage over there to do this DR test, but the workload goes away. It's still back to S3. Yep. Works for Windows, works for Linux machines as well. So it's not just, and then you can go back and also go back if there are apps running in there, the app gets recovered, and then you can also go back and run your application tests in there. All right. So that's P2V. The other thing we introduced recently is the ability to actually clone. So a lot of the cloud vendors that we talk to really like this feature because now it's a good migration strategy. So I've gone in, I've sold you a DR as a service. So you can essentially go back in and use my cloud environment as DR. Guess what? You tested DR, everything is working fine, and when you bring it up online, you haven't seen any impact on your application. So basically that means it's your workload is sufficient for you to actually run it in the cloud. You don't have to go back and do it over here. So I've seen many times where they have done this virtualize me, they've done it once, and instead of retiring this virtual instance over here, they retired the physical server out. The other thing over here is, yeah, I like it, but I don't want to go back in and do BMR for all of my physical servers. So what you can do is basically go ahead and do a clone. Essentially take that one physical instance, virtualize me, and keep cloning that in the back end over here, go in and keep changing the personalities, and that's about it. So it again goes back to the thing of collect the data once and then repurpose it for many uses in the back end there. So that was when I had my workloads on physical servers. Same concept on virtual servers as well. Go back to what we talked about from a backup over here, DR over here, and bring it up over here. Essentially the same thing, except instead of doing it inside my local vCenter, I'm doing it on a DR site or in a hybrid cloud environment somewhere. Right? So I go back in, do a backup, or I can sync it off over here from a replication perspective, do a scheduled restore, and the restore we'll talk about this in a second, but only recover back things that you need, not the entire VM. Goes back over here, it can power it up. You can leave it powered off, so you don't have, because you don't have to do DR every day, just bring it over here, leave it powered off. When DR strikes, you just power it up, or you can basically do it on an ongoing basis. And the whole workflow automation, what a workflow is basically it's our own orchestration engine that you can do all of these, click, one step at a time. But you can actually go ahead and create an automation process where all of these gets triggered off one after the other. So it's basically a very sophisticated automation operation with things like loops built in, decision forks built in, conditional statements built in, and so on and so forth. So you basically design this policy of this is what I want to happen for all of these workloads over here in this order. This is what needs to happen when this step is successful. This is what needs to happen when this step is a failure. So you can define this very sophisticated set of operations, can it, and then deploy it out to different workloads out there. So it's not just about creating this one tiny sandbox which can have 3 VMs. I can get really sophisticated. I can stand up entire mini data centers in here and go through a whole bunch of sequences through the whole thing there. Really depends on how sophisticated you want to get.
For your VM replication there, are you using something that's equivalent to VRS?
We'll come to that in a second.
Okay.
Any other thoughts on our whole hybrid cloud thing? Kind of right now think VMware and Hyper-V, but literally CommVault is platform agnostic, so the infrastructure is there. It's a matter of putting the plumbing in there to expand it out.
Can I ask you a question? You've had the virtualize me functionality for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
Has it been used as a P2V mechanism?
It's usually been used as a DR test mechanism more than a P2V. But what we found is that, especially if with a lot of our service provider customers, they're looking to offer backup as a service, but that's resonating less. What resonates very well with those guys is DR as a service. And that's what our service provider friends are finding is it's a very good onboarding technique. You say you put on-prem infrastructure, I'm just going to give you my hybrid cloud as an extension of that. Continue doing your DR test for whatever, once a month or twice a month over there, and then over a period of time, once in a while, do a DR test, don't fail back. Let's see how it's running. And so they've found a lot of workload actually migrating just by that process over there.
Is there target source differentials that you can do on a hypervisor level? So can you port from one hypervisor to another using that feature?
It's
Yeah.
okay.
I know that's always one. It's not one that you would see often, but every once in a while that question gets asked. So,
Yeah.
but we can chat about that later.